Can you talk about what we know about Alan Dershowitz?
Well, Dershowitz, Virginia named him as a perpetrator, and Maria Farmer submitted an affidavit saying that Dershowitz went upstairs to where the young girls were. And then another Epstein victim named Sarah Ransom also submitted an affidavit that said that, and she said that she'd been had sex with Dershowitz. And if you look at Dershowitz's record, and he wrote a op-ed for the LA Times where he thought the age of consent, I think, should be 14. And it didn't really matter how old the other individual was. I think Alan has a long and illustrious history of misogyny. And why Virginia kind of walked back that a little bit, she said she may have made a mistake about Alan Dershowitz. I think that he had somehow leveraged her. I mean, that's just because she was really solid. When she litigated with Ghislaine Maxwell for the defamation of character, I mean, Ghislaine Maxwell threw a bunch of reptilian lawyers at her. And they really tried very hard to break her. And she stood strong. So I'm inclined to believe that there was some kind of extracurricular activity that Alan Dershowitz got wind of and leveraged Virginia with. And what's interesting is Virginia submitted an affidavit that said that she had been molested by Prince Andrew and Alan Dershowitz and Jean-Luc Brunel. Brunel was Epstein's partner in a modeling agency where they would get underage girls. A lot of them they would actually buy underage girls in Eastern Europe. And Brad Edwards and Paul Cassell were the attorneys for Virginia at that point. And Cassell was a former federal judge. And they believed Virginia, and enough to, when she said that she was molested by Alan Dershowitz, they put it in that affidavit. And then Alan Dershowitz went on the offensive. And Alan Dershowitz said, I'm going to get their law license and and they're going to be drummed out of the legal profession. And it was the bite of a paper tiger. Actually, no one got their law license revoked. It ended up to be a stalemate. So that's one of the reasons why I think that there was some leverage on Virginia, because the litigation between Edwards and Cassell versus Dershowitz ultimately ended up in a stalemate.
I mean, he is a very pushy, I mean, it's an understatement, litigious, and I think scary person. I mean, we can see how this is a totally different sphere, but obviously, Norman Finkelstein, the political scientist, Alan Dershowitz, he and Alan Dershowitz, debated each other, and then Norman Finkelstein exposed some shoddy scholarship, to say the least, by Dershowitz, and then Dershowitz really was successful in getting Finkelstein blacklisted and blackballed for quite a bit. But I wanted to ask you another question, which was about something that you talk a lot about, understandably, because it's very important, which is the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund. Can you elaborate on that?
The Epstein Victims Compensation Fund is a scam. And basically, it's there to ensure that there's no depositions. David Boies was instrumental in crafting the parameters of the Epstein Victims Compensation Fund. And so was Georgiana Feldman. And David, we don't know the criteria of the Victims Compensation Program. We have no idea. The criteria that they're using is not made public. 225 women have applied for compensation. 150 have been rewarded compensation. And of those 158 have declined, because if you get money from the Epstein Victims Compensation Program, you've got to sign an NDA saying that you can't go after any of your perps. So that program is being used to shut down victims that the feds couldn't shut down. And it's pretty heinous. And plus, I've spoken at a number of conferences over the years, and I've gotten to know a lot of psychologists. The International Society for the Study of Trauma Dissociation has an international conference every year. I've spoken at one of those, and I've spoken at one of their webinars. And actually, I contributed a chapter to a book that was published that a number of members of that society had contributed chapters to. And I've gotten to know a lot of therapists, a lot of psychologists, a lot of psychiatrists that work with victims of abuse. And I know a psychologist, and she's an eminent psychologist. In this field, she's known, but actually she's been on some documentaries and people would probably recognize her. And she had a client that said that she was trafficked by Epstein when she was under 10 years old. And the young woman now described Epstein's home and other things around Epstein's home that she couldn't have possibly have known. And then I know another therapist, same type of a thing, where she had a client that said that she was trafficked by Epstein when she was under 10. Neither one of those girls got any kind of compensation from the Epstein Victims Compensation Program. And that is because, according to those therapists, they didn't fit the cover story. The cover story is that the youngest girl that was molested by Epstein was 14, which, is pretty heinous. But I think that Americans would be even more outraged if they knew that Epstein was trafficking girls under the age of 10. And actually, there was an Australian newspaper that reported that Epstein's victims were as young as 11 or 12. But the American media there's so much negligence and malfeasance involved in the Epstein case. The American media is really good at digging up salacious dirt about the perpetrators, but they don't really seem to care about the victims. And I'm not aware of one media outlet that has screamed for justice in the Epstein case. And I started an organization, it's called Epstein Justice, and you can find us at epsteinjustice.com. And there was a big document dump last January, and CNN contacted me. And because I was the guy that put the black book on the internet, they wanted to talk to me about the document dump. And then I talked to the producer, and we were texting throughout the day. And then I said to him, while we're talking about this document dump and these documents, I'd like to talk about Epstein Justice too, because I'd told him the organization. And then I got a text about 10 minutes later that said, Nick, we're going to go another direction. So,
and not have you on?
No.
Right.
That's happened to me a few times with the mainstream media.